Hello, this is my process for drawing Wonder Woman in ArtRage 5. Using the oil brush here and just getting everything in initially, blocking everything in as always. The rough shapes, focusing on silhouettes and rough colours. I started off basing my Wonder Woman off the latest film and then decided to adapt it in my own style. I wanted to introduce a little of the original series as well and combine the two in some kind of weird hybrid Wonder Woman type thing. Initially, as always, a fairly neutral grey background and working on a single layer to get everything blocked in. Again, more work with the oil brush. I've got it set to Insta Dry at the moment. I think that may have been a mistake because I always like to turn that one off so the paint actually blends in. Sometimes I deliberately put on Insta Dry if I don't want the blending, if I just want to really block colours in, but I'm pretty sure that I forgot about that this time. And auto clean is something I typically always leave on as well. I'm not too bothered about leaving any of the colour on the brush as I use it, although it is quite useful as a blending tool as well. And I was thinking about putting the star on her headpiece, and a stencil in theory would have been ideal for that, and that's what I would play it around with there. And then that was the original tiara, but I wanted to put the one from the original series, but with my own slant on it. And then really fully putting in the old style of costume. And again, it's a great thing with digital art. You just paint over what you've done if you want to. You can delete things. At the moment, I'm just painting over. Need to just adjust the colours a little bit to bring the form out. And then the shield, again, I think I was using as reference pictures from the original series. And at this point, I do like to get a top level thumbnail and keep it hanging around because it's very useful. A lot of the time I keep my eyes quite a lot on it just to see that everything is looking okay. Because if it looks okay in the thumbnail, then overall it will look fine. I tend to work fairly zoomed out anyway, but this just helps. That and flipping really helps to keep perspective on your painting overall. Bit of warping there. It's really useful on portraits to tweak things. The character of the face is just starting to come out, which is very important as part of a portrait. And now using the soft palette knife, pull paint around. My usual thing I do around this stage. It's really useful for hair as well, to drag out hair and to get some nice sharp strands. But just defining the lines and adding in detail, it's ideal for that, especially if you've laid down a base level of paint using the oil brush. Those two tools work incredibly well together. Flipped. I saw a few issues, I think, with the nose, which jumped out at me initially. Quite a few bits of tweaking here. I think the style of the face is really starting to come out now. Quite a lot of refining going on here. quite a lot of zooming in and zooming out. Just not something I do too often. And as you can see, I've got the insta dry off, which means that the oil brush will be blending. Although I'm not working on the base layer at the moment. I'm working on a separate layer. And with the blend mode set to overlay to try and bring some of the colours out a bit more. At the moment, focusing on what kind of colours I want to introduce. Got a very neutral background at the moment. My thoughts will start to wander on to what I'm going to do with the background to bring the main figure forward and make it stand out. I'm playing around with form, adding in some blend modes. I think maybe I want to do some form of backlight. And now for importing and overlaying my previous art. Daenerys is always my go-to, especially with portraits, and playing around with the blend modes. And I really like the look of kind of quite washed out blending. I can't remember which blend I used for that, but you can see that it's brought the face out. It's quite white and quite stark, which I think looked quite good. And I wasn't happy with the arm either, and again with digital art I was able to remove it, and I just did a little cheat there and copied and pasted the other arm, which I thought looked pretty decent, and then hide it under the hair, and using warp to change the size of the arms because it didn't quite look right. And again, I kept that arm on a separate layer. I can move it around quite nicely, and I'm just fiddling around placing it and trying to get it to look right. And it looked okay. I was able to merge down. And the core of the idea is pretty much there. I wasn't too happy with the shield, and I think in the end I decided to keep it quite simple and not really have much in the way of a logo on it. Again, cheating a bit, decided to save myself a little bit of work, and I don't think it really would have worked in the context of the picture anyway. It would have drawn the eye away from the middle part and out to the corner with the detail. The edges of the painting really should be starting to reduce in detail, especially with a portrait. You don't want your eye drawn outside, it should be drawn in towards the middle. Refining a little bit with the airbrush. And back with the oil brush again. Tidying a few things up, because when I imported the Daenerys image over the top, I pretty much just merged down, and now I'm tweaking things a bit. That face, it took me a while to pick up that it was just a bit too big. I could have made the body a bit larger, but as the face was inside all the hair, it was a lot easier just to cut out and shrink down a little bit. I do like the silhouette of the square in the background with the white. It does seem to work quite well. But I'm not sure whether it really quite well. I like the angle of it, but it doesn't quite work. I may need to tweak that a bit. I'm keeping it at the moment. Here you can see I'm just really starting to focus on the background, which means as I've merged everything down over a period of time, some of the background has got onto the same layer, and I like to have the background on a separate layer. Therefore, I'm just going through and cleaning things up a bit. Experimented with a fill tool there and different gradations to see what works, and overlaying some stencils on top in the background. I think the background at the moment is a bit busy. I need to simplify it a bit more, which means that the focus will be drawn into the main portrait. And using color dodge here, as you can see here, I wasn't really too happy with that background. It was too busy. Therefore, I decided to simplify things a bit by just putting in putting some tube in and then blending it all. using the simple palette knife, and it's quite a useful background thing to do, just to get the tube out, squirt it around a bit in subtly different colours, and then you can use a palette knife. I'm playing around, as you can see I've got a few layers going at the moment. I'm playing around with different blends and, you know, in combination, trying to get something to work. I do have an idea that I do like that blue colour in the background, and therefore I'm just using a few tools, airbrush with different blend modes for example, to try and get a bit of variation in the background and get it to try and work with the foreground. And then as it's a blue background, there needs to be some ambient light appearing on the main characters to get it to bind in a bit better overall, and that's what I'm doing there. I'm using the airbrush subtly to just bind in the outlines. The hair looked a bit weird, it looked a bit big and fat, therefore I'm using the warp tool, which is always very useful, to pull it in slightly, and then using the soft palette knife to bring some of the hair out, to bring the edges out again, and also the eraser, because it's easier now because I've got the character on a single layer and I can get some good edges in contrast to the background. Starting to noodle a bit now. I may be overdoing the hair slightly. Also Photo Director I was playing around with a bit as well, something I newly installed, and just seeing what works and exporting out to an image which I can then easily import back into ArtRage. At this stage I don't mind doing that. I know I've almost finished the painting, I just want to see what subtleties I can bring in over the top, just a few tweaks. And then I imported a whole load of tweaks that I made and then decided on the right one. And there we go, that's the final portrait of my version of Wonder Woman.